In a stunning move, Canada has just upended North American trade with its new steel-first policy. On July 19, 2025, Prime Minister Mark Carney's government announced that Canadian steel will now be prioritized for domestic use. This is a direct response to President Trump's 30% tariffs on steel and aluminum, a bold counterpunch that Washington didn't see coming. Instead of exporting millions of tons of high-quality steel to the US, Canada will keep more at home to fuel its own factories, infrastructure, and workforce. The message is clear. Canada is no longer content to simply react to US trade policy, it's taking control of its economic destiny. For decades, North American industries have relied on deeply integrated supply chains, especially in automotive and construction. Canada's move challenges this model, forcing both countries to rethink their dependencies. For the US, which has long depended on Canadian steel, this new reality means a tough adjustment. Ottawa is building a firewall against external shocks, declaring economic sovereignty. The steel-first policy flips the script, turning a defensive measure into a strategic offensive. It's a game-changer that could reshape the economic landscape for years to come. Canada is signaling it will use its own resources to build its own future, on its own terms. The shockwaves are just beginning. To understand Canada's dramatic move, we need to rewind. The Trump administration's 30% tariff on steel and aluminum imports was a severe blow, especially to Canada, America's closest ally and largest trading partner. In 2024, Canada exported 5.5 million tons of steel to the US, worth over 7 billion Canadian dollars. The new tariffs made these exports unprofitable overnight, leaving Canadian producers with a massive surplus and workers facing layoffs. Communities in Hamilton and Windsor braced for more job losses as the industry reeled. The Canadian government couldn't just absorb the blow, it needed a plan that showed strength and protected jobs. The steel-first policy was born out of necessity, a direct response to American aggression, not unprovoked protectionism. Canada's move is about regaining control and shielding its citizens from the fallout of another nation's political decisions. The trade relationship had become strained and adversarial, forcing Canada to act. The steel-first plan is a defensive strategy, but also a signal. Canada won't be pushed around. It's a realignment of economic priorities, triggered by US protectionism. When one country builds walls, its partners are forced to build their own. This is the new reality of North American trade. The stakes have never been higher. The steel-first policy is a strategic shift, redirecting millions of tons of steel from export to domestic use. Canadian factories, infrastructure, and green energy projects now get first claim on Canadian-made steel. Major projects like Alberta's pipeline extensions and new wind farms must use domestic steel to qualify for federal funding. The Royal Canadian Navy's new icebreakers will be built with Canadian steel, boosting demand and jobs. This produce locally, use locally model is a lesson from recent supply chain chaos. By focusing inward, Canada is building a more resilient industrial ecosystem. The policy creates a virtuous cycle. Domestic demand supports jobs, which strengthens local economies and funds further development. It's a long-term vision for a stable, prosperous Canada, built with Canadian steel. Canada's steel-first policy is a lifeline at home, but a headache for US industries. The American auto sector, long reliant on Canadian steel, now faces shortages and higher costs. Automakers like Ford and Stellantis could see production costs rise by up to 9%, with vehicles like the Ford Bronco costing nearly $2,000 more. Even a $1,000 price hike can cut vehicle sales by over 1%, putting American jobs at risk. Ironically, Trump's tariffs, meant to protect US jobs, have backfired. The steel-first policy has created new headwinds for the very industries the tariffs aim to help. The ripple effect extends to construction and appliance manufacturing. Any US business that relies on Canadian steel will feel the pinch. Now, American companies are caught between high tariffs on other imports and reduced supply from Canada. Canada's move exposes the unintended consequences of protectionism. In a globalized economy, building walls can weaken your own foundation. The North American supply chain is more fragile than ever. The fallout is just beginning. The numbers tell the story. In 2024, Canada produced 14 million tons of steel, 40% of it exported to the US. Trump's tariffs made this trade unprofitable, forcing a dramatic shift. Canadian steel exports to the US are projected to drop by 3 million tons, while domestic consumption surges by up to 2.5 million tons. The government plans to fill any gaps by ramping up steel recycling, creating a more sustainable industry. Major infrastructure, green energy, and defense projects will drive domestic demand even higher. In the short term, federal tax revenues may dip as exports fall, but the government expects a rebound as domestic activity grows. The plan is to build a self-sustaining industrial base, short-term pain for long-term gain. Canada is betting on itself, and the numbers suggest it's a calculated risk. The steel showdown is as much about data as diplomacy. The reaction in Canada has been swift and mixed. For steelworkers and unions, the policy is a lifeline. Factories in Hamilton and Windsor are ramping up hiring, and the United Steelworkers call it a shield for job security. The mood on the factory floor is hopeful. Families can plan for the future again. But the Canadian Construction Association warns that restricted supply could drive up prices, delaying or canceling projects. The government must balance protecting steel jobs with keeping construction affordable. South of the border, U.S. industry groups are furious, calling the policy hidden protectionism. They now face a tough choice: pay high tariffs elsewhere or deal with Canadian shortages. The policy has deepened tensions in the Canada-U.S. trade relationship. Canada's steel-first policy is also a green strategy. The government is investing over $1 billion to help the steel industry decarbonize, focusing on electric arc furnaces that cut emissions in half. The goal: a 40% reduction in national emissions by 2030 and net zero by 2050. Canada aims to become a global leader in green steel, targeting markets like the EU, which will soon tax imports based on carbon content. The policy links industrial renewal with climate action, cleaner steel for a cleaner future. New infrastructure and green energy projects will use this low-carbon steel, creating a powerful synergy. It's a holistic approach: jobs, climate, and national development all tied together. Canada's Steel First plan is legally shrewd. Instead of an outright export ban, it prioritizes domestic supply, a move designed to comply with World Trade Organization rules. The policy echoes Brazil's successful strategy with coffee in the 1990s. Supply the home market first, then export the surplus. Canada's approach is flexible. High-value, specialized steel can still be exported if domestic needs are met. This nuance helps counter accusations of unfair trade practices. Ottawa has made it clear, the policy isn't permanent. If the U.S. drops its tariffs, Canada will restore normal exports. The Steel First plan is both a shield and a bargaining chip in future negotiations. It's a message to Washington: the path back to normal is in your hands. Canada has turned a potential trade violation into a strategic advantage. The legal groundwork is as important as the steel itself. Canada's Steel First policy is more than a response. It's a turning point in North American trade. For decades, Canada played the junior partner. Now, it's asserting itself, prioritizing its own security and future. The ball is in Washington's court. Keep tariffs and watch U.S. industries struggle, or negotiate a new deal. Canada's investment in green steel could open new markets, especially in Europe, and reduce dependence on the U.S. The policy protects jobs, strengthens supply chains, and accelerates the green transition. It's a bold declaration. Canada won't be a passive recipient of U.S. policy. The North American trade game has changed. Canada has shown it's a skilled, determined player, ready to reshape the board. The next move is America's. The world is watching.